Hey everybody, it's your man James, Mr. Quentin Treasures, back again with some more video action for you. Unlike usual, we're shooting something fun and light and entertaining I got for you guys. Today's one it's not going to be like that. It's a much more heavy topic, and it's one I actually wish I didn't have to do. And you're going to see why in a moment here. But yeah, it's something I felt needed to be talked about, and so I know I'm a little late to the party, as I always am. Always running behind, but this was something that happened about a week or so ago, and it's kind of blew up a bit. And I thought it was something that really needed to be talked about. And so I throw my hat in the ring and give my take on it. And in case you can't already guess what it is, this is about the big kerfuffle over a drawing of The Absolute Batman by Daniel Warren Johnson, where he's basically killing an ICE agent. And, the fallout from that, as well as some responses that were done. And, I got some people here. I'm going to show you some videos of some people talking about it as well, getting more points of view for you guys. But I just want to thank you all for joining me today, and say if you think what you hear here is of value, please make sure to drop a like down there. Help out the algorithms, always appreciated. Also, if you got any comments on this stuff, please drop them down below. Always want to hear what the people have to say, because it's very important to me that you get a voice in all this. Also, be sure to share out links if you think this is something that more people need to see. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe yourself so that you can join up and not miss any of the content that comes around here, whether it's good or bad or indifferent. It's all here for you guys. So I want to get those numbers up. I really appreciate that when you help me out that way. So with that out of the way, the little shill, let's get on with the show today. And like I said, the attire I'm wearing kind of tells you what it's all about. Daniel Warren Johnson did this image of Batman killing an ICE agent, and there's been a lot of fallout from that. And again, it's something I felt I needed to talk about again. After last month, when we saw what happened to Charlie Kirk, this seemed to be more steps in that direction, and I thought it was important to talk about. So let me get this screen shared here, so we'll get me off because we don't need to see my face. And then let me bring up the share. And here are this is the image. This is the image that started all this off. It's Daniel Warren Johnson, known best for his work on Transformers and Skybound, which I've really been enjoying. It was a book I was very much having a lot of fun with and enjoying a whole lot. But now in the wake of this, I was sad when I heard he was leaving the book, and now I'm more like relieved that he's left the book. So maybe I can still read it and enjoy it. And this is the kind of feelings that something like this brings out of people. I really can't understand why creators do these kinds of things. Now, this was a commission. Now, we need to be straight up at this. This is not something Warren drew on his own just for fun or because he was trying to help the cause or whatever. This was a commission. And, so I understand this wasn't his idea necessarily, but the fact that he went through with it tells me he, at the very least, is sympathetic to what it's showing. Because, I've known artists in my time, and I've worked with them, as you guys know. And, there were a couple times where people came to us with commission ideas, and the artists weren't up for doing that. They're like, yeah, I don't want to draw that. And it was for various reasons. Sometimes it was personal, sometimes it was political, sometimes it was just they thought it was a really crappy idea, whatever the reason. But whatever the reason was, they always had the option to say, no, I'm not going to draw this. And considering the times that we're in right now, like I said, was recently with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and people attacking ICE officers on the streets and things of that nature, you're trying to run them down and things. You would think Daniel Warren Johnson would be aware enough to go, this probably isn't the kind of image I should put out right now. He's like the it guy, at the moment, like with his Transformers, and he's going to do some absolute Batman work in the near future. So you would think with all that on the table that he would go, this probably isn't the right time for me to do a drawing like this. And it just stymies me how these creators let their political views or lack of political savvy dictate what they're going to do this way. I mean, did he not think there was going to be blowback to this? And and again, it's not like, well, this is posted up by some guy who commissioned it. He also posted up on his own Twitter page. If you go to Daniel Warren Johnson's Twitter page and scroll down, you will see this image. He's proud of this image. You know, I mean, it was something he did. He said, "Well, okay, I'll do it, but just don't show anybody. I don't want anyone." I could almost understand that, but he proudly put this out there. That's where I pulled this image from, was off of his Twitter page. So I mean, I can't even sit there and go, "Well, he doesn't really believe it," because he has to believe it, because otherwise he wouldn't have proudly put this out there if he didn't. He wouldn't have done it if he didn't. And I just, it's insulting for so many reasons. First of all, for the casual, I will say incitement to violence to people in law enforcement. Because I mean, look, it doesn't just say ICE on here; it also says police. So the casual, disregard for the life of law enforcement is bad enough, and then you got Batman doing it. Batman, who works with law enforcement, he doesn't attack them. He aids them. The only way he would attack a cop is if the cop is maybe corrupt and he's trying to kill Batman. That's the only way he would attack a law enforcement. He wouldn't, and he certainly, even if he had to attack them, he wouldn't break their necks as you're seeing here in this image. That's not what Batman does. And you can say, well, this is the absolute Batman. It's not the same, but it's all based from the same. Where does absolute Batman come from? Where does he get his look? Where does he get his gadgets? Where does he get, basically any kind of credence in the backstory? Where does it all come from? He's still Bruce Wayne. He's still a guy in a bat suit going around fighting crime in Gotham City. Now, there may be some differences in tone, some differences in like the origins of how it happened and all that. But generally, the basis is all the same. It's the same as the Batman that we've read about for 85 years. Batman would never do something like this. He would never murder law enforcement. Even if they were trying to murder him, which, we've seen stories where that's happened, where law enforcement has gone after Batman, and he doesn't go out of his way to harm them. He goes out of his way to not harm them, to clear his name or whatever he had to do in the story. So this is like, it's disrespectful to the character. It's disrespectful to the lore. It's disrespectful to the audience. It's disrespectful to ICE and police who put their lives on the line every day, enforcing the laws of this nation. I mean, this is disrespectful on so many levels. I don't understand how someone like Daniel Warren Johnson, who has everything going for him right now, would think this was a good idea to put out an image like this. And of course, as always, when there's blowback on something like this, you're going to get more. So we got this right here. And this is an image by artist Sergio Cariello, who, you guys probably know best from his run on Azrael and his run with, various other, he's done some Batman work himself, so he's no stranger to the character. Now, here he is. This was done, as I heard, that he did this piece in response to Warren Johnson's, where now you see the absolute Batman, wearing an ICE label on him and taking down Antifa thugs. And, it's funny, and I understand the whole concept behind it. And at least this does make some sense, because Batman would stop people who would assault law enforcement. He would stop people who were going out there on the streets and rioting and damaging property, and he would stop those types of people. So at least these guys are ones that I can go, well, yeah, Batman would stop this. He would stop people who basically are like rioters and who are like domestic terrorists. He would stop people like this. He wouldn't, and it was noted to me, and again, I'll show this in some of the videos I have for you, that Sergio made sure, pardon me, that the Batman wasn't killing the Antifa guys. He's basically he's like restrained them. That's all he's done. He hasn't broken any necks like you saw in the previous one by Warren Johnson. This is Batman doing what Batman does: stopping criminals, stopping chaos. And so, although I can understand some people who had a problem with this, because this was put out by Sergio, he got some blowback, and it was shared by Chuck Dixon, who got even more blowback, and over this. And it's funny to me that there's more blowback for this from a certain sex of people than there was in the previous one. And to me, it's like both. If you're going to get uppity about either one of the pieces or both of them, then it should be for the same reason, which is you shouldn't make Batman a political character, because he's not a political character. That's not what he's there for. He's not there to mouth your specific political views. He's not there for you to bash on those you don't agree with. That's not the Batman's role. That's not what he does. That's not what he exists for. He exists primarily, number one, for entertainment value. And secondly, it's also he's a hero. Batman does not attack and murder law enforcement. Batman doesn't even murder the criminals like this. He doesn't do that. That's not what he does. So like I said, that's the one thing I'll give Cariello is at least he shows Batman doing what Batman is supposed to do, what he was created to do. And it just, but it still stymies me why anybody would want to politicize a superhero like this. Just let them be what they are. And if that's quote unquote problematic to some people, well, then they need to get over themselves. That these are not meant to be political figures. And they need to not be treated that way. It's disrespectful to treat them this way. Like I said, I understand Sergio wanting to clap back on the disrespect that Warren Johnson did, but I'm not sure this is the exact correct way to do it. And again, why artists would want to do this, I don't understand. Why go this route? But now we're going to get into some stuff where, I heard some stuff from people, some videos I saw that I think are going to expand on this even more. So we're going to share the screen again. And this first one comes courtesy of Chuck Dixon himself, who was talking about this. And, he goes into this and, I have the closed captioning on here just in case, and because I know sometimes with the boomering up I do around here, you don't always get the sound. So I made sure to put on the captions so you'll see it, but you'll see what he says here. And, take note of what he says in these next few clips I'm going to show you.
Because they explained to me as if I was as big an ignoramus as they were. If I was as big a subliterate and illiterate as they were, they explained to me that Antifa is an anti-fascist organization. They don't like fascists. They go after fascists. So if you don't like what Antifa is doing, shooting at cops, beating up reporters, censoring people, looting and burning businesses, if you don't like that, then you're a fascist. And the other thing they would explain is that Batman, he'd be on their side. I'm like, really? Batman would be on the side of mobs of people defying the law, beating up cops, beating up innocent people, destroying public property. Yeah, Batman would be, he's all about that stuff. And then when I would say, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, Absolute Batman would be on their side. Well, I don't know anything about Absolute Batman. Apparently, Absolute Batman is a whole different thing. It's not Bruce Wayne. It's not, it's not Batman. It's Absolute Batman. And will be gone in a couple of years. And everybody, only a small minority of comic geeks will go, remember Absolute Batman? And most people will go, no, I never heard of it. Okay, so Absolute Batman, apparently there's no rules. He likes crime. He helps criminals. In addition to that, the drumbeat went out, and post after post after post after post insisted that I didn't understand Batman. One post said that whoever hired me to write Batman was an a-hole. Okay, Denny O'Neil, famously liberal, got along great with Denny. I counted Denny as a friend. He counted me as a friend. We had a lot of respect for each other. We didn't agree on anything politically, but who cares? And I never put my politics into comics. So, because you don't do that with Batman. Any political statements that Batman made were from Batman's perspective. Batman went on anti-gun screeds. I wrote really compelling, convincing anti-gun arguments for Batman to make numerous times. And I didn't agree with Batman at all. So that's how you write characters. You don't write characters to go along with your beliefs, which is really silly when you get right down to it. And we're all being silly. Batman agrees with me. He wouldn't like Antifa. No, you're wrong. Batman would agree with me. Well, Batman's a fictional character. Let's get right down to it. But anyway, I thought.
So there you have it. I mean, again, I just got done saying some of this myself. Batman is a fictional character. He doesn't side with anybody, really. And, I love how Chuck broke all this down. And again, for someone to tell Chuck Dixon, of all people, you don't know Batman. I mean, this is the guy who was the Batman man in the 90s, the most prolific comic book writer in comic book history. And you're going to say he doesn't understand the character. I mean, just it stymies me how stupid some of these people can be. But you saw him mention this. Is like, Batman does not fight law enforcement. He fights against criminals. That's what Batman does. And who are the criminals? It's the Antifa people, despite what they call themselves. You can call yourself anything you want. It doesn't mean you are that thing. And so they can say, well, we're anti-fascist, but they're not. They are the fascists. And that's what this is, you got people who think that it's, if you don't think as they do, they need to squash you. And if that's what they're doing, well, that's not anti-fascist. And that's exactly what they do. And so I just thought it was really telling how Chuck goes in this and how they said that the person who hired him was an a-hole. And again, it's Denny O'Neil, a very liberal guy. Even I know this. I mean, this is the guy who wrote the Green Arrow, Green Lantern storyline with Neil Adams in the 70s, where it's extremely political and very much left-wing politics, And so it's not like it's something like, oh, we didn't realize that he was. It's obvious that Denny O'Neil was that way. You can read it in his Green Arrow, Green Lantern. You can read it in his Iron Man work. I mean, he's the one that made Jim Rhodes, the black man, into Iron Man. You know what I'm saying? So, it shows you the ignorance of the people of not just the concept of Batman, but of the people who've worked on him, the people who've created him, and people who have fostered, the character for 8.5 decades. And yet they want to talk to them as if they don't know, when it's actually these people who don't know. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward a bit here and get to the next point that I think Chuck Dixon made. It was, again, a really good point. So let's let Chuck hit you with it.
And Sergio's pointed out, a number of people have pointed out, this is in reaction to, I can't even remember the artist's name, and he's a current Batman artist, and he drew a picture of basically absolute Batman, obviously breaking the neck of an ICE agent. And Sergio's response is Batman pretty gently subduing a pair of, he didn't want to have Batman killing Antifa members, because Batman doesn't do that. So Batman is pretty gently taking these punks down, probably taking them to custody, hand them over to the cops. If you watched any video, like particularly from Chicago or Texas, you'll see Batman's treating these kids a lot more gently than the cops do. There's been some brutal takedowns. You go, ooh, you just see somebody slammed to the asphalt, and six ICE agents or 6 cops land on their back. Not to say the cops are being brutal. If you really pay attention, cops are doing a lot with sprays. They're doing a lot with paintball, pepper spray, bullets. And I noticed the Chicago cops, they switched from truncheons to wooden dowels, like you would buy a wooden dowel at Home Depot. If you've ever been hit by a truncheon and hit by a wooden dowel, you'll know there's a big difference. Wooden dowel basically just kind of discourages you. It's like a tap on the shoulder. Stop doing that. Getting hit with a truncheon, yeah, you're talking about serious bruising, broken bones, and the rest. So the cops are being remarkably patient with these people, as Batman is being in this picture. Sergio took great pains to show that Batman is in no way harming these guys. He's just doing what Batman does. So,
and there you go. The other point I made about this is, this is people who understand the character. Chuck Dixon, Sergio Cariello, guys who've worked on him for many years. They understand who the character of Batman is. And they're showing it in a way that this is what Batman would do. He wouldn't do what Daniel Warren Johnson's version did. He would do this. And again, like I said, I don't necessarily agree that the correct response is to, go with the other side with Batman this way, because again, Batman is not a political character. He is not. And so I'm not sure that's the right way, but at least, like I said, in this, they show that they understand who the character is and how the character would react in such a situation. And that's very important, because again, you got people who are out there doing this stuff to our characters and they don't care. They don't care. As I showed you in the video I did, called Something's Gotta Give, where I talked in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, how you can see from the Twitter how these people slowly escalate things. It went from just, they tell you to F off to suddenly it's let's execute Trump on the White House lawn, and it builds up. And you can see now it's the same thing with the work. They don't understand that this work is not meant to be used in this way. It's not meant to be their political mouthpiece. And yet that's exactly what they do. And it's why sales are down. It's why shops are closing. It's why the mainstream is dying. It's why, all these things it's why you have the rise of independence and guys doing crowdfunding to get the money. It's why the people in the industry are poorer off than they were before. I mean, they've said page rates haven't changed in 30 years. 30 years, and there's been no increase in the page rates. I mean, that's a telling thing. And, rather than look at themselves and go, what are we doing that is driving away the audience, that is driving away the sales, that is bringing about the collapse of the industry? Instead of that, they just double and triple down with more of the same. And it's mystifying why they do this. And you got someone like Chuck Dixon, who he understands this stuff. And, as he said, he did stories with Batman where Batman said things that Chuck himself is completely opposed to. Like, I would never believe this. I don't believe it at all. But yet he was able to write the story because his story was about Batman, not about Chuck Dixon's views, but about Batman. And that's what he did. That's what he focused on. And that's the difference between, this image by Sergio Cariello and Daniel Warren Johnson's. Which again, just to be straight up with it, it was a commission. He was commissioned by somebody else to draw it, but he agreed to draw it when he didn't have to, and he posted it on his own Twitter page as if he is proud of this. So if it wasn't his idea to draw it, he certainly agrees with the idea behind it. And that's not Batman. That's not what you do. That's not how you treat this character. That's not how you treat the audience of this character. And again, Chuck Dixon perfectly spells this out. Okay, now we're going to get to our final bit here from Chuck. Again, fast forward a little bit here. And again, I'll just going to let Chuck make the case for you here so that, you fully get what this is all really about.
There's nobody that doesn't like Sergio. But even he had it when he saw basically Batman being maligned. It wasn't even really I don't think the political thing. It was just that you were going to use Batman, turn Batman into a murderer to support your political cause. You're going to, and for people to go, oh, mostly peaceful, nonviolent. I mean, come on. What nonviolent organization promotes an image like that? What nonviolent organization brings guillotines to their protest rallies? What nonviolent organization parades around with guns and supports violent criminals? They want violent criminals freed, put back on the streets. So, I mean, Sergio was, reacting to, a character that we all grew up with, who is a heroic character. For him being used in this way, and I doubt very much that artist will lose his job. He'll continue drawing Batman, and he'll probably make a fortune selling prints of that, Batman murdering an ICE agent. So it is what it is.
And there you go. I love, again, Chuck just breaking it straight down for you. This is not who Batman is. This is not what Batman does. I've never met Sergio Cariello, but from everyone who I've seen who has met him, they all say what Chuck did. He's like one of the nicest guys you could ever hope to meet. So for him to have been irked enough to draw a response to what Daniel Warren Johnson did, that does say something. That says something about, where we're going and what's happening, because when you can get mild-mannered people, like, again, like they say Sergio Cariello is, head up enough to do something like that, that really tells you how far gone things have become in the mainstream of comics. And, so like I said, this is just, I know none of this is like shocking to anybody. I'm sure, for those of you most of you watching this, you're probably like, yeah, I've known this for a while. I've known it for a while. But just to see it constantly reinforced and in degrading ways like this, like to malign the character of Batman and his fandom, and to use him this way and as a political cudgel against people you don't like, it really is beyond the pale. I mean, artistry is supposed to be above such pettiness, and again, for someone like Danny Warren Johnson, who's one of the it guys of the moment, to do this, it just makes no sense logically. I mean, again, all these people have is their feels, my feels. And that's not going to convince anybody. It's certainly not going to convince me. It's not going to convince Chuck Dixon or Sergio Cariello. They're not going to be convinced by your feels. We want facts. We want evidence, and you don't have any. And that's the problem that I see here is the disconnect between people who run on emotion and people who try to run on logic. And there's I don't know if there's a way to bridge that gap anymore. I used to think maybe there's a way we could get people on the same page, and we could try to talk our differences out. I don't know, like Charlie Kirk always did. That's what he always tried to do, to get people together who don't agree, to talk their ideas out, to put the rationality of what they believe out there and see if anybody can be convinced. I'm not sure we're at a point where that can happen anymore, and it's a scary thing to have to consider that. But now I'm going to share another video here with you. And this one is from Wes over at Critical Thinking. And again, he made some very good points too that I thought, again, should be put out there. So let me share the screen here with that. And once again, I have on the closed captioning just in case. So here we go.
It actually takes quite a bit for me to come to the conclusion that I actually am no longer willing to support a comic book artist or writer for reasons outside of just being bad at their job. I do not take these type of decisions lightly when it comes to things outside of just quality of art. But Danny Warren Johnson at New York Comic Con did a commission this week. He proudly presented it out there on social medias, and it has Absolute Batman with his hands around the neck of an ICE officer. And the way I interpreted it is that he had broken his neck, although I guess some people could say he's merely strangling him. I have had people say, Wes, you should have known that Daniel Warren Johnson was a lefty the entire time. It's not really about that. That's not really coming into the equation. I actually support plenty of lefty comic book creators, people that are politically not in line with what I personally believe in, but I think they're good writers. They just happen to have differences of opinions. At this point, I assume essentially every comic book creator working for Marvel, DC, and basically all the other publishers are leaning in one particular direction when it comes to politics. And in this case, the reason I have a problem with what Danny Warren Johnson did in that commission, actually, I don't have a problem with him doing the commission. Commission work is what it is. It's the fact that he proudly presented it to everybody because obviously he was very happy with the work that he did. And in my opinion, the way that I see it, and art is subjective, right, is that he is promoting violence against the men and women of ICE who are obviously in the news right now. They're being besieged in multiple cities with people going down there basically rioting. We even had somebody a couple weeks ago pull out a rifle and start shooting at what they thought were ICE officers, but I guess accidentally killed a couple of illegal aliens in the process, which I think is awful. I've seen enough death and destruction in my life that I wish that we could all get along. Although I do freely admit that that is a pipe dream and that's not what's going to happen. But the way I interpret what Danny Warren Johnson did was support for the people that are rioting and attacking ICE officers in multiple cities right now and calling for more political violence. That's the way I see it. And at that point, if you're going to go out there and use a DC character or a Marvel character and go push radical, violent means for your political ends, I don't want to support you anymore. I don't think that's something that I want to do in my soul. People will be like, but Wes, what about the letter or the other people working on the book? Well, sucks to be them. If I could give my money to, Skybound or DC Comics with their annual and say, here, these are the funds that I'm going to give you, but you're not allowed to give any of them to Daniel Warren Johnson, fuck it. I'd probably do it. But at this point, I don't want any of my money going to that guy because I think he's going to take my money and he's going to go support stuff like that. I think he's going to give financial means for people to go out there and try to perpetrate violence on ICE officers. I am not for violence of any kind. When people went out there and they took Daniel Warren Johnson's image, with the ICE officer and they replaced it with an Antifa person and said, look, I made it better. I don't think you made it better. I don't want to see absolute Batman or the real Batman or Superman or any comic book character going out there and snapping the necks of Antifa members. It doesn't sit right with me. In fact, it sits just as wrong as what Daniel Warren Johnson did.
And there you go. I can't find any fault in anything Wes has said. I do think that what Daniel Warren Johnson did is reprehensible. Again, not just because of what Wes talked about here, where it seems to be incitement of violence towards law enforcement officers, but also because, again, the disrespect to the audience, the disrespect to the character. I'd even say, to a degree, maybe even the disrespect to the medium itself. And so I can fully understand Wes's feelings about not wanting to support people who do these things. Again, that's what I've done many times. I will not buy works if there are people on them who have done things and said things that I find, personally abhorrent. So like me, I will be joining Wes. I will not support Daniel Warren Johnson ever again on anything. And even if he issues an apology, it doesn't matter because you did this thing. You had to know what you were doing. I mean, you can't feign ignorance and go, well, I didn't realize it was going to be. No, you knew what this was. You knew what you were doing. You put it, as Wes said, he triumphantly put it out on his social media pages. And in doing that, that tells me what you truly think. And so if you have something like, sort of like milquetoast apology, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to offend anybody. I didn't mean to incite violence. Yes, you did. You knew that's what this was. You knew that's what you were doing. And you just didn't care, or you agreed with it, and that's why you did it. And there's no other way to see it. And now again, I do agree with Wes that just doing the exact opposite isn't the way to go. Like I said, I mentioned that myself with Sergio's piece. Although Sergio did not have him killing the Antifa people. Like I said, that's the one difference I'll give Sergio's piece is he has Batman restraining the Antifa thugs, but he's not killing them the way Daniel Warren Johnson has him killing the ICE officer. And that's a big difference to me. But I agree with him on the whole in that saying, well, we're just going to do the opposite of you. You did it to ICE officers. Now we're going to do it to Antifa. That isn't the answer here. I completely agree with Wes on that. And, I won't say it's just as wrong, but it doesn't help. It doesn't fix the overall problem. It's not stopping people like Daniel Warren Johnson from doing things like this, or people in his sphere who say things like that. And that's what we need to put an end to. We need to put an end to that mentality, and just throwing the opposite mentality in their face is never going to be the answer to do that. And so I agree with Wes on that point of it, is that, this is not the way to go. I appreciate what Sergio did. I know he felt he had to do it because it was, he had to respond to this because it was such a visceral thing. But I think in the end, it's not going to solve anything. It's just going to be, just another facet to the overall problem in the end. And so I like what Wes said there. I think he was spot on. And definitely, again, that mirrors my feelings in a lot of ways. Now, as before with Chuck Dixon, I'm going to fast forward here a bit to another segment of Wes's well thought out response to all this. So let's get into that.
And what Daniel Warren Johnson and certainly what Scott Snyder are doing are potentially putting DC Comics in a bad position. Now, they've already been put in a bad position because of people like Scott Snyder, who certainly knew who Gretchen Felker Martin was, certainly knew that Gretchen Felker Martin had wished violence or threatened violence upon J.K. Rowling, certainly knew that Gretchen Felker Martin had celebrated 9/11, was okay with keeping the book on the docket. And I know for a fact that Scott Snyder knew that stuff. And he is not painting a very good picture of himself. And I think a lot of people are going to have deeper realizations about whether or not They want to continue supporting DC Comics, especially after the Gretchen Felker Martin, Charlie Kirk stuff. And now we've got Daniel Warren Johnson using Absolute Batman to advocate violence on real people, ICE officers, and the major consultant, the leader of the Absolute line, Scott Snyder himself, going out there and seemingly, because he put nothing else into it, giving it his personal stamp of approval. You can sit in your home and think whatever you want. You can have a discussion with your loved ones in private and say whatever you want. But once you start putting that shit out there public, and trust me, Twitter, Instagram, Bluesky, all that stuff is public speaking right now. Now you have forced people to make a decision. Do I still want to support this person? Do I still want to support this company? Do I like what they're representing? Do I want them to take my hard-earned money that I'm using to buy their product and divert those funds to things that I absolutely don't believe in? And this is what Daniel Warren Johnson, Scott Snyder, and DC Comics are kind of doing right now.
Again, once again, Wes calling straight up, and I agree with him. Is, you know, this is part of the problem with it all. Is once you've done this, now you put these questions in people's heads. You know, what is my money going towards in supporting this character or this book or this creator? Where is that money going to go? Is it going to fund things that I am diametrically opposed to? Is it going to fund things that I think are harmful to the nation and to humanity and to, you know, the industry? You know, these are things that are questions that, you know, you should never want your audience to be asking themselves. You should never want that in any business, in any, not just comics, but in any business. You never want these kinds of questions being asked by the people who are purchasing your products. But when you got someone like Daniel Warren Johnson doing things like this, it's going to raise those questions. When you have them hiring people, again, like he noted, the Gretchen Felker Martin person, you know, who attacked Charlie Kirk after his death, you know, and belittled him for that. You know, when you're doing these things and hiring these people and putting it out there where it's public, you know, how can you not expect the people who are buying your product to eventually start to ask these questions? And 9 times out of 10, they're not going to go your way. You know, the answer that comes out of them will not be one that will be very favorable to the company or to the creator or to the people in charge or whatever. It's not going to be one you want, which, again, just like I said, makes all of this such a stymieing, mystifying thing in my mind. Why would you do this? Why would you put that out there in this way? You know, do you not understand what you are doing? Do you not understand the whole concept of audience, the audience principle, and how that works with the funds that you want to receive from that audience? Again, it's just more of the same, just constantly building, and again, just creating more animosities, creating more resentments, creating more divisions, and all for what? So you can stick it to Trump, so you can stick it to the people you don't agree with politically, so you can stick it to people you don't like. I mean, is destruction of an industry, destruction of an art form, you know, personal destruction of your own legacy, is it worth that? I mean, because this is now going to be for Daniel Warren Johnson. This is something that's going to tarnish his legacy. You know, he had a great legacy of great works people loved. You know, Wes himself has championed Daniel Warren Johnson as one of the greats, you know, of the modern era. You know, like I said, I loved his Transformers run. To me, it was like the best book. I mean, if you guys watched my end of the year, you know, best of, you know, for 2024, you saw Transformers was like one of the books I thought was one of the best books out right now because of what Daniel Warren Johnson was doing. And in there, he did the exact opposite of what he's done with the Batman here. Is he respected the lore. He respected the characters of the Transformers. And even though it was different than, you know, maybe what we saw in the Marvel series or what we saw on the TV cartoon, it still felt like the Transformers. The characters still felt as if they were true to who and what they are, even in Daniel Warren Johnson's slightly changed, you know, universe of how it's working. And that was a great thing. I love that. I have no problem with a new take as long as it's respectful to what has come before, as long as you are respectful to what the characters and creations are about. And yet here, he's done the exact opposite. And as far as I can tell, he doesn't even seem to care. And that to me is a real problem. That's as much a problem as someone like a Gretchen Felker Martin coming in who's full of hatred and then spewing that hatred in the work and spewing that hatred on the audience. It's just as bad, if you don't care as if you actually did hate them. And again, I don't see what a solution is to this. Like I said, I used to think we could find a way to come together again, like the Charlie Kirk way of debating it and discussing it and, getting it all out and figuring out ideas. I'm not sure if that's possible now. And it's going to be to the detriment of this entire industry that is that way. And now we're going to get to this last bit here from Wes, which I think kind of hammers home really what all this is truly about, why this is so bad and what it's really saying, not just about this industry, but about basically humanity as a whole.
And I've definitely come to the realization over the last several months, and I'm not one of those people that ascribes to the "they all want you dead" scenario, but I am coming around to the realization that far more of them want me dead and you dead and a lot of people dead than I actually wanted to give it credit for. And I don't think Jeff Lemire just went blindly supporting Antifa because he didn't realize just how violent they are. I've come to the realization he likely knows exactly what they represent, just how violent they are, and he does support that. Not only am I not going to be supporting Daniel Warren Johnson, but I don't think I'm going to be supporting Jeff Lemire either. I don't need to know your violent, perverse political fantasies about how you would snuff your opponents out if you've gotten the chance, or you supporting people that are advocating and actually doing that on a daily basis. I don't mind you sneaking your politics into the comic book. I'll read Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk with his bullshit that he put in there. I can get over that kind of stuff. But once you go this far, I think I'm out. And
there you go. I mean, there it is. It's the hard realizations that a lot of us are coming to with what all this means. I mentioned this in my video, something's got to give. That's what you saw in the escalation, and Wes is now, you can see he's coming to the realizations like, these people, they really do want you dead. They aren't interested in debate. They aren't in discussion. They aren't interested in finding compromises or solutions. They want what they want. And if you don't give it to them, they will be violent. And that's really what I see in all this. I agree with that. That's again, I've come to that conclusion myself. That they do want you dead. They don't care anymore about anything except getting rid of you because you are an impediment to what they desire. And if that's where they're going, I get that leads nowhere good for anybody. Not for us, not for them, not for anyone. And again, it's angering that I can see all this and, I talk about it, and yet the people who are doing it themselves don't see it or don't care to see it. They want to shut their eyes and go, I'm just standing against fascism. I'm just standing against the evil, but you're committing evil. And so how can you stop evil by committing evil? How does that work? Again, see, is it any wonder they don't understand a character like the Batman? Is there any wonder why they can't tell great stories anymore with these heroic figures? Because they don't understand what true heroism is. They don't understand that heroic ideal, those heroic values. And that's why they're able to draw Batman snapping the neck of an ICE officer, a person of law enforcement, even though it's exactly the opposite of what Batman would ever do. And yet they have no problem doing it because for them, well, these characters are just ciphers for my politics. They're ciphers for what I believe. And they are whatever I deem them to be. Like they have no voice of their own, which, to some degree is true because they're fictional characters. But I've always believed that the lore and the history and the canon matter. And that is the voice of the characters. That is their voice. As you saw with Chuck Dixon, when he said how, he would write Batman saying things that Chuck himself is completely diametrically opposed to, but yet he didn't write it because he believes it. He wrote it because that's what he thinks the character of Batman believes. That is the way Batman would think, not the way Chuck Dixon would think. Whereas in Daniel Warren Johnson's image, that's what Daniel Warren Johnson, or at least the guy who commissioned Daniel Warren Johnson, that's what they think. That's not what Batman thinks. That's what they think. And that's the difference. And it's, like I said, it's ruined comics. It's ruined a lot of great entertainment. And as I said, it's made the world, I think, a lot more dangerous. You know, and you know, I go back to something I saw attributed to Stan Lee. He had a quote, and you can see it if you go to my Twitter page. You can see it there. He goes, and I might be paraphrasing it slightly, but he goes, "I think entertainment is one of the most important things because without it, people will go crazy." You know, and I totally agree with that. You know, we need our escapism, and when you got guys like Daniel Warren Johnson doing commissions like this, and then proudly trumpeting it on his social media platforms, that tells me that they don't care about the entertainment side to what comics are supposed to be, and that's bad for comics. But then, in doing what he did, he fomented the incitement of violence. He's put people's lives at risk. He's siding with people who are doing criminal actions, and all of this, and it doesn't speak well of him as a person. So, I mean, I don't really see any plus sides outside of the money he got for the commission. And as I said, as someone who's worked with artists in the past, they don't have to do a commission. I'll even tell you one that happened for me is someone wanted an adult style commission from Richard Moore. And, if you guys know Richard Moore's work, he's not above doing adult themed work. But the key in it was they wanted the person wearing a Star of David necklace, which indicates a Jew. And Richard wasn't sure with what they wanted, if that was something he wanted to draw because of what it might say about him. He was afraid of the very thing we're seeing with Daniel Warren Johnson is the blowback. If this guy puts this out publicly and people know that I'm the one that drew it, are they going to espouse and say that I'm anti-Semitic, that I have a problem with Jewish people? And he doesn't. Again, these are things, you wouldn't think you'd have to think about, but in the climate today, you do. And this was years before all the current stuff that's happening, that this person did this with Richard Moore. So I don't think Richard had much to worry about at the time. But, my God, is like today, if that image were out, who knows what would happen? But that's the conscientiousness that is missing in so many modern creators today. They don't think like that. They don't think the way Richard Moore did, like, what's this going to say about me? What is this really saying, this image? I know what this guy wants, but is that how it's going to be interpreted by an audience if it gets out there publicly? And, that's the kind of thing you need to think about as a creator in the comic book industry. And, that's not what we're getting. So I got one last bit of video here for you. And this one's going to be a quickie. This one's going to be a quickie because it's a short one. It's a short. So I won't be able to give you the closed captioning that I did with the other ones. But again, it's a very important one. And I think it's one definitely worth watching. Again, to like reinforce everything that I've been saying and you've been seeing from Wes and Chuck and all the rest. And this one comes from the great Eric July, who really to me is someone who's almost a prognosticator. And so I want to share this little quick short video he did with you guys. And here we go.
I want to talk about something that some may consider a little controversial. Of course, people with ulterior motives, they try to overcomplicate this issue. Everybody has seen pretty much in every single entertainment industry how politics has really just ruined everything. Some, however, when discussing this topic, they're a bit disingenuous because they'll say things like X thing has always been political, and that purposely misunderstands what people's gripes are. Yes, stories may have like governments in them, and thus they're going to entertain political aspects by textbook definition. But when it is unique to that specific universe, well, that's not what people really are taking exception to. Also, you can't really conflate, for example, someone doing something good or acknowledging universal truths as if that's political in that sense. That's, again, not something that people take exception to. In my opinion, as I've talked about this subject extensively, there's two core issues. Not everybody falls into these two camps, but there's two core issues in relation to politics or social views that people take exception to in entertainment. Number one, it's far too on the nose. So it's more of a lecture by creators than it is entertainment. You have to remember, some people often forget. So if that entertainment is just a direct reflection of current day politics, well, people are gonna sort of reject it. Number two, and perhaps this is the most important, it just simply lacks balance. In current entertainment, I think it'd be a lot more digestible if when you're choosing between good and evil, you entertained like multiple ideas or different sides of the general political spectrum. But when it appears that one side primarily is going to be villainized or one particular side is going to be always heralded as this hero, well, people are going to sort of have problems, and that's really what plagued mainstream entertainment. This also made it very, very predictable. You could just look at characters and you can tell, well, that's going to be the hero or that's going to end up being the villain. But yes, you can, contrary to some people's beliefs, leave politics largely at the door. That may be a little necessary if you are going to create good, fun entertainment. Obviously, not everybody that like works for the Rippaverse aligns with me on political views. Our only requirement here is that you do not let it get in the way of the stories that you're trying to tell or like get in the way of the company. And especially don't allow your politics to make you such a hack that you end up attacking customers. That right there is the mistake that burned a lot of people in the mainstream.
And there you go. Leave it to Eric July to take 90 seconds and just spell it all out for you. And that's exactly right. This is exactly the problem with what Daniel Warren Johnson did. Aside from, the fact that, it's not like what the character's supposed to be, and aside from the fact that it seems to be inciting violence against law enforcement, all these things that others have talked about, me and Chuck and Wes, we talked about these others, but right here, he gets right down to the nitty gritty, is you're going to turn people off when you inject your politics in the mouths of characters that are not you. When you have characters, again, especially with a lot of history behind them, and you do this, it turns off part of your base, part of the consumer base that you are relying upon for your fundage. And, they're not wrong to take exception to that. You're wrong for doing it, for making it, political in the way that he's talking here, is, too on the nose, as he put it. And, I think we need to really have a serious, realignment in the comic book industry if there's any chance to save it at all. And at this point, I'm not sure there is. But if by some miracle there's some way to save it, that has to be a major part of the equation, is a realignment of people understanding in this industry, who want to work in this industry. If you want to go out and do your own creation and be as hyper political as you want, that's fine. You can go out and create your own. We have it today with the crowdfunding. You can create your own. You don't have to work for the big corporations, corporate comics. You don't have to work for them. But if you do, then you have to understand that it's not about you. It's not about your politics. It's not about the vision you want to put out there in the world. It's about the characters with their rich history and canon and lore that has been around for decades longer than you likely have been. And you need to respect that. And you need to respect the audience who enjoys that, because that's what they're there for. The fun that Eric July mentioned about, the fun entertainment, that's what they're there for. They're not there for your political screeds. They're not there for you to say what you think about a certain social topic. They don't care. They never have cared. I have never cared. I don't care what a creator's political leanings are. I want Batman to be Batman. I want Spider-Man to be Spider-Man. I want, the Hulk to be the Hulk. That's what I want. And if you can't do that, if you are so filled with your personal hatred and animosities towards certain people, if you are so filled with your political views, thinking that they are the antithesis and superior to all others, then you don't belong on those characters. Go out in the indies and create your own works, and you can fail out there, because you're going to get a very, very niche audience of people who are going to support you. But when you want to come to the mainstream, when you want to work on the corporate characters that everybody knows, that are franchises that have been built for decades, and you want to step in and do that, no, that's wrong. You don't do that. That is absolutely the exact opposite of what should be acceptable. And, I think what we really need is a house cleaning and editorial at the companies, to get people in who feel the way I just expressed. That's what is the true answer to all of this. Because if you can get the people at the top, the people who are basically the custodians of mythic lore, as the great Denny O'Neil once heralded these characters as. That's what you need. You need people who feel that way. And if you get them in, they will get in creators who feel that way and keep out ones like your Gretchen Felker Martins and your Daniel Warren Johnsons and people who have these hyper politicized, hyper partisan views that will turn away your customer base. And that's what needs to happen. And again, like I said, it would also help, I think, in turning down the temperature so that we don't see another Charlie Kirk, so that we don't see another person taking a shot at the president of the United States. And because again, as often been said, culture is downstream of politics. And so if you're seeing that's happening politically, political assassinations, you got to look back to the culture. What's going on in the culture? And this is what we're talking about. This is why it's a problem. This is why showing, Batman breaking the neck of an ICE officer is a problem. It's a problem for the industry. It's a problem for humanity. It's a problem for, civility in general. And it needs to stop. And creators need to be mindful of these things. When people are asking you for commissions of things that are wrong, Batman would never kill a law enforcement agent. And so for someone to ask you for that, you say no. No, I'm not going to draw that. I won't draw that because that's not what this character is about. That's not what I'm about. I'm not advocating violence against law enforcement. Even tacitly, I'm not going to do it. And, if they say anyone is saying, I want you to do this thing where he's breaking a Jew's neck. No, I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to support something that can be seen as anti-Semitic. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to, or if he says, go out and do one where he's killing black people. No, I'm not going to do that because I'm not a racist. I'm not going to support that. That's what you do. You say no. And I know that this industry is horrible. Like I said, the page rates haven't changed in 30 years. It's hard to make a living in the industry. I get all that. But if the only way for you to make a living is to take the commissions of people who would commission things like this, then maybe this industry isn't for you. Maybe that's the solution. Maybe you need to find something else. Because this isn't the answer. Just as doing others, showing Batman breaking an Antifa guy's neck isn't the answer to this. It's not the answer to what Daniel Warren Johnson did. And to make those works because, I need to get paid, that's not the answer either. That's not the answer for you. You should find another way. And that's what's missing. And so, if we can just get some people who truly respect what the characters are in the mainstream, could it be saved? Maybe. But sadly, I don't see that happening. I don't see any of these other your fat boy Tom Brevorts and CB Cebulskis and your Jordan Whites and these people who they have no care about being the custodians of mythic lore that they're supposed to be. Because that's the job. That's the job of a comic book editor and editor-in-chief, is to be the custodian of mythic lore. Jim Shooter talked about things like this. And he was labeled a scourge by these very same people. Gee, I wonder why. So, there we are. That's all I got for you guys today. I just had to talk about this. I felt it was important. I felt it was something that needs to be addressed. And so, I just, let me know your thoughts down below. Like I said, I always like getting comments from you guys. I always hear what you got to say. So let me know what you think. Am I on the money? Is Wes and Chuck and all and Eric July, are we all on the money about what we're talking about? Do you think that we don't know what we're talking about? Do you think there's a better way? What do you think? Because again, for me, I do want to believe in the Charlie Kirk way. We got to talk about these things. And so, I want to hear what you guys got to say. And again, if you got some value out of this, please drop a like down there. I appreciate that. Also share out some links and subscribe so we can get more subscribers here who can, maybe we can turn some more people onto this and make them think, about what this all actually means. Because again, it's not going to get any better if we just sit on our hands and go, well, I'm just not going to say anything about it. You know, that's not my way, and that's not the way I think it needs to be right now. We need to have it so that, you know, things can change, and the only way they can change is if people are out there talking about it and getting others to talk about it and think about it, and that's the first step. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. I appreciate all the support you guys have got. I'll be back soon with some more stuff, more fun stuff. Okay, this is one that just I felt I had to do, but I do have some fun stuff planned for you guys. Again, we got Halloween coming up, and I got some stuff planned. I got a Wyatt's Grade I'm going to have for you for Halloween. I got a artistry appreciation I'm going to have for Halloween, and I'm trying to work out a live stream that I'll do on Halloween. So we'll have to see how that all works out, but you know, I'm working on it. So I definitely got some stuff, guys, for you down the pipeline here. So there's going to be some good stuff. We can get to have some fun again and have some laughs and have a good time, because that should ultimately be what all this stuff is about having a good time. And so I definitely want to bring that to you guys. And again, I thank you all for joining me today. I hope this was something that gave you some pause and something to think about. And again, I'll be back soon with some more fun stuff. And until next time, take care.